Take a seat, son. Let the real lawyers speak. The courtroom went still, like a church right after a disrespectful laugh. Mahogany walls, bronze scales above the judge's bench. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting cold reflections. Across polished shoes and polished egos, the two white officers at the defense table chuckled under their breath. A bailiff tried not to smirk. Even the stenographer raised an eyebrow. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, hands calm at his sides, suit tailored sharp and dark. The courtroom silence grew thick around him. Judge Wilkins leaned forward, clearly annoyed. Sir, I said this matter doesn't concern civilians. If you're lost, the exit is behind you. If you believe professionalism has no color and disrespect should never wear a robe-type respect. In the comments right now, he reached into his inner jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately, not flinching, not folding. A matte black folder appeared in his hand. He placed it gently on the plaintiff table. Opened it. Slide one sheet forward. Gold lettering gleamed beneath the courtroom's glare. United States Department of Justice. The officers stopped chuckling. The bailiff stiffened. The judge's lips parted. But no sound came out. I'm not here to testify, Your Honor, he said quietly. I'm here to prosecute. Judge Wilkins froze. Her gavel hand trembled ever so slightly. Your name? He looked her directly in the eye. No smile, no heat. Just the truth. Special Prosecutor Elijah Grant, appointed by the U.S. Attorney General for civil rights violations. The air cracked like glass. The smirks were gone. And suddenly, everyone in that courtroom remembered power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks in calmly and waits. Mr. Grant, may I speak with you in chambers? Judge Wilkins was already losing her gavel grip metaphorically and literally. Elijah didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, calm as a quiet storm. Whatever you have to say, Your Honor, you can say on the record. Transparency matters, especially today. A murmur rolled through the courtroom. Reporters shifted in their seats. The two white officers, Detective Harris and Sergeant Cole, suddenly weren't leaning back so comfortably anymore. Cole's fingers twitched near his belt. Harris gave a small cough, looking toward the exit as if someone might rescue him from this unraveling. But this wasn't about them anymore. This was about history. 15 years ago, Elijah stood in a courtroom like this one, but on the wrong side of the railing. Back then, he wasn't wearing a suit. He was 17. Wrongfully arrested. Accused of stealing a car he'd actually helped push out of a ditch in the rain. He still remembered the way the judge glanced at him, barely concealed disgust, like he was chewing on something rotten. How does a kid like you afford a leather jacket like that? Elijah didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't even look at his public defender. He just stared straight ahead, counting the cracks in the ceiling and memorizing the name on the brass plaque behind the bench. He got released a week later. No apology. No explanation. But something changed that week. He started reading case law. In the juvenile library. Memorized every phrase of Miranda v. Arizona. Swore to himself quietly, one day I'll walk back into a courtroom, and nobody will dare assume who I am. Present day, Your Honor, Elijah said. Now back in the moment, I'd like to proceed. We have civil rights charges filed under Title 18, Section 242. His voice carried. Not loud but uncheckable. Judge nodded stiffly, cheeks tight. Proceed. Elijah stepped forward. No notes, no binder, no script. Your Honor. This case centers on two officers who assaulted an armed black man during a routine traffic stop. The body cam footage was deactivated. Medical reports show a broken rib and internal bruising. And the man was charged with resisting arrest after being dragged from his vehicle. He let that sit. Today, I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm demanding accountability. And for the first time, the people in the pews began to lean forward. Not in judgment, but in quiet awe. Back at the defense table, Harris whispered, "We need to call McMillan." We weren't told he was a DOJ guy. Sergeant Cole shook his head. "This isn't just any guy. That's Elijah Grant." Harris frowned. "Who?" Cole's voice dropped. "The one who sued the state of Georgia at 24. And won." Suddenly, both officers looked like kids waiting outside the principal's office, realizing the principal wasn't in a good mood. Judge Wilkins tried to maintain control, but her grip on the narrative was gone. The court had shifted. The weight had moved, and Elijah wasn't finished. The moment the court recessed, the murmurs didn't stop, they multiplied. Not loud. Not public. Just murmurs behind hands, sideways glances, name drops whispered like urban legends. "Did you see the way he shut Wilkins down? That was Elijah Grant? I thought he worked federally only. He made Harris look like a rookie." Reporters started texting before their heels even hit the floor. Paralegals took notes they weren't assigned. A junior attorney live-streamed the court hallway just in case something big happened again. But the most telling moment wasn't loud. It happened in the corridor outside courtroom 6B. Elijah walked out alone. No entourage, no cameras. Just the rhythmic tap of his Oxfords against old courthouse tiles. His face was unreadable, expression set in something close to calm, but it wasn't calm. It was for a purpose. Ahead, a white janitor paused mid-mop as Elijah approached. The hallway was empty except for them. The man was older, gray at the temples. Hesitated for a second, then leaned on the mop handle. Elijah nodded politely as he passed, but the man didn't just nod back. He raised one closed fist slowly, not high, not dramatic. Just enough. Elijah didn't stop walking. But he did something rare. He smiled. Back in the judge's chambers, Wilkins was pacing. This wasn't in the file. No one told me the DOJ was sending him. She looked at the clerk like it was her fault. The man turned out to be more than just another activist with a file. "He blindsided us," she said again, this time softer, unsure whether she was angry or scared. The clerk hesitated. "But ma'am, everything he said was factual." Wilkins spun. "That's not the key point, but it was." And the clerk knew it. And so did half the courthouse by lunch. Later that afternoon, 2 interns in the basement archives watched the video on their phones. They had found the security footage. Someone had leaked it, Wilkins said. "Let the real lawyers speak." Elijah, sliding the DOJ folder forward, the stunned silence. The name drops. Special Prosecutor Elijah Grant. The younger intern Jasmine, first-year law, exhaled sharply. People are going to love this online. The other, a white guy with a Yale tote bag, crossed his arms. "Sure, but he made the judge look stupid. That's risky." Jasmine narrowed her eyes. "He didn't make her look stupid. She did that on her own." By 3 p.m., the story had made it onto legal Twitter. By 4 o'clock, a local paper posted, "Federal prosecutor embarrasses county judge in viral courtroom moment." By 5:30, a news station requested the court transcript, and by 6 o'clock, Judge Wilkins' office was fielding calls from the Chief Justice's office downtown. But in all the chaos, what stuck with Elijah most wasn't the headlines. It was a moment in the hallway later that day. Near the vending machines, a young black woman in slacks and a courthouse badge looked up from her phone as Elijah passed. She didn't say anything, just started a little too long. Elijah paused. "You okay?" She nodded fast. "Yes, sir, just, I saw you this morning. That was," she trailed off. Couldn't find the words. He nodded slowly, understanding. "Keep going," he said gently, even when the room tells you not to. She smiled, eyes shining. Yes, sir. Symbolic moments aren't always on TV. They're not always loud. Sometimes they're a raised fist in a hallway. Sometimes they're a quiet smile from someone who finally feels seen. But they spread, and they don't go unnoticed for long. The first sign wasn't a confrontation. It was a missing file. When Elijah arrived at the courthouse the next morning, his assistant Nina looked up from her laptop with a worried frown. Your court docket file for People v. Harris and Cole? The one stamped last night? Gone? Not gone, she said carefully. Just marked as under review, internal. Court hold. Elijah raised an eyebrow. That doesn't happen. Not without a judge's order. She nodded. Exactly. By 10:30 a.m., the next sign came. An email. Anonymous. No subject. No signature. Just one line. You've made your point. Leave it alone. Elijah read it 3 times, then quietly deleted it. He'd received worse. Once, during a wrongful conviction appeal in Mississippi, a sheriff's deputy had left a noose in his briefcase. He smiled. Used it as an exhibit in the trial. Won the case? Compared to that? This was amateur hour. But the resistance wasn't all. Anonymous. That afternoon, Elijah received a formal request on county letterhead from Judge Wilkins herself. The request? A private chamber meeting to discuss tone and professionalism in future proceedings. Nina read it aloud, then looked up with disbelief. She wants you to be more professional? Elijah chuckled without humor. When people can't beat your facts, they attack your tone. Are you going? Of course, he said, but not alone. Across town, in a quiet restaurant booth, an older man stirred sugar into black coffee. A retired civil rights attorney, mentor, once made headlines for going toe-to-toe with governors. He looked across the table at Elijah and said quietly, "They'll come at you soft first, with decorum complaints, process delays, maybe a gentle op-ed questioning your temperament. Then it gets uglier." Elijah nodded. "I'm ready." The man looked at him for a long time. "I know you are. But that courtroom isn't just wood and marble. It's a memory. And that system? It remembers people who embarrass it." Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Judge Wilkins wasn't just worried. She was furious. "He's grandstanding," she snapped at her assistant. "Bringing the DOJ into a county matter. This isn't about justice. It's about making headlines." Her assistant hesitated. "But the body cam footage was inconclusive." Wilkins snapped. The assistant didn't argue, but she'd seen the footage. They all had. And it hadn't been inconclusive. It was damning, but the machine didn't stop for truth. It stalled. It was delayed. It waits for you to get tired. Or to make a mistake. Later that day, Elijah stood in the records room, flipping through redacted pages. The deeper he dug, the more he noticed things missing. Phone logs, officer histories, a timeline edit. They weren't even sloppy about it. Just confident he'd give up. He held up one page to the light, 2 entire paragraphs blacked out. "They're trying to bury it," Nina whispered beside him. Elijah exhaled slowly, voice steady. "Then we dig deeper." That evening, as the courthouse lights dimmed, a janitor pushed her cart past Elijah's office. She paused, knocked lightly on the open door. He looked up. She didn't say anything, just handed him a folded note. No envelope. No name. When she left, he opened it. In slanted, nervous handwriting. It read, "Cole bragged he turned off the cam before the first punch. Try the backup audio log. They forget it's separate." He stared at the note. Then smiled. Not wide. Not smug. Just steady. The system was pushing back. but it wasn't ready for how far he'd push forward. The next court date started without drama. No outbursts, no media swarm, no glares from Judge Wilkins, just that thin, brittle smile she wore when she couldn't stop something from happening. Elijah didn't bring a stack of papers. He didn't roll in with a team of assistants. He brought one laptop, one file, and one truth no one had planned on being aired in public. Your Honor, Elijah began, walking to the evidence display without even glancing at the defense table. This file contains a full backup audio capture from the patrol vehicle's secondary system, something the responding officers either forgot or hoped we wouldn't know existed. He tapped the keyboard. Audio filled the room, tinny, cold, but crystal clear. You gonna cut that thing off? A laugh. Already. Did. Don't need oversight for this one. Dude, you see his face when we yanked the door open? Like a damn deer. He twitched, right? I'm calling resisting. Boom. Easy collar. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the court reporters stopped typing. The two officers at the defense table shifted. Cole's jaw tightened. Harris paled. Elijah didn't gloat. Didn't even look their way. He just clicked pause and said, "That concludes our exhibit." Judge Wilkins cleared her throat twice before finding her voice. "Mr. Grant, where did you obtain this audio?" "Public record," he said simply. "Once you know where to look." A ripple of quiet understanding moved through the courtroom. It wasn't just about knowing the law. It was about knowing how the system hides things, where it buries the truth, and what tools are used to keep people like Elijah from finding it outside. In the hallway during recess, a young black paralegal stood by the vending machines, texting fast. He just dropped audio that nuked their whole case. Cole is done. Downstairs, a white bailiff who'd laughed earlier during the first hearing now avoided Elijah's gaze, and up in the gallery, a law professor watching the trial turned to her. "Student, that man is surgical. He's not just building a case, he's rebuilding the courtroom's memory." By the afternoon session, Elijah requested a full review of all suppression motions filed by the defense. Judge Wilkins sighed. "You're asserting that prior evidence was withheld intentionally?" "No," Elijah said, calm and clear. "I'm asserting that it was deliberately buried." And with that, he submitted a second file. Email timestamps, metadata logs, chain of custody breaks. No drama. Just proof, and the weight of it was heavier than any speech. After court adjourned, a reporter caught up to Elijah outside. "Mr. Grant, how does it feel to present such a pivotal case in your own hometown?" He looked at her, then past her to the courthouse steps where he was once handcuffed as a teenager. "I'm not here for feelings," he said. "I'm here for justice." Then he turned and walked down those same steps. Not like a man who'd won, but like one who knew there was still more to do. That night, Elijah sat alone in his office, staring at a picture taped inside his desk drawer. It was old, black and white, a mugshot, his own, from the case that changed everything. He didn't look angry in it, just young. And tired. Now, the man staring back at that photo wasn't tired. He was focused, because justice wasn't loud. It was patient, and it was remembered. "Mr. Grant, let me be absolutely clear." Judge Wilkins' voice was sharp, echoing through the wood-paneled courtroom like a whip crack. "The way you've conducted yourself in these proceedings has bordered on disrespectful." Hush fell over the room, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Eyes flicked from her to Elijah like they were watching a fuse burn towards something. Combusttibla. Elijah stood at the center of the courtroom, still, hands folded, not angry, not smug. Just ready. "Your Honor," he replied, voice even. Are you accusing me of violating courtroom procedure? Wilkins blinked. I'm accusing you of tone. Grandstanding. Turning this into theater. A few jurors in the gallery stirred. One reporter raised their pen. A bailiff coughed louder than necessary. I see, Elijah said, walking slowly back toward the evidence table. So the issue isn't the facts I've presented. It's that I've presented them too well. He paused. I'd argue, Your Honor, that clarity in court isn't performance, it's accountability. Wilkins gripped her gavel. Watch your words, Mr. Grant. If you believe holding power accountable isn't disrespect, it's justice-type respect. In the comments from the defense table, Officer Harris whispered, She's losing it. Cole didn't respond. He was too busy staring at the jurors and realizing half of them weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Elijah. And it wasn't a curiosity. It was respect. Wilkins leaned forward. Let me remind you, Mr. Grant, I am the presiding authority in this courtroom. And let me remind you, Elijah said without raising his voice, that your authority is not above the Constitution. The law protects every citizen loudly or quietly, visibly or not. He turned, addressing the gallery. And for years, too many walked into this courtroom believing they wouldn't be heard, that someone like me wasn't meant to stand here, that a badge or robe made them untouchable. He locked eyes with Wilkins. Not today. The court reporter's fingers flew. Cameras clicked from the back row. Wilkins was flushed now, not just with rage, but realization. She was losing the narrative, and she couldn't stop it. Elijah returned to the table. Your Honor, I move that the court remove all previous objections filed by defense regarding body cam suppression and allow the full chain of evidence review. The public deserves to see everything. Wilkins stared at him, then the room, then the two officers who had brought this entire moment upon themselves with arrogance and assumption. She had two choices: double down or stand down. After what felt like a full minute, she finally spoke. Motion granted. A collective breath was held, then released. Not just because of what she said, but because of what it meant. The system blinked. And the man who wasn't supposed to win just made it flinch. Outside, the media had already begun drafting headlines, but inside, something more important had happened. People who had never seen themselves on the winning side of power just watched it happen. This man didn't just hold the system accountable. He reminded us who it's supposed to serve. Anchor, national morning show. The clip had gone viral. Elijah's calm dismantling of Judge Wilkins. The audio file. The gavel dropped in slow, reluctant concession. By noon the next day, news stations across the country had played it on loop. By evening, his name was trending. Elijah Grant #DOJIN court #tone is not disrespect, but Elijah didn't slow down. He didn't go on TV, didn't tweet, didn't bast. He reviewed 3 witness statements, refiled a motion for full disciplinary records on Cole, and responded to 14 emails from civil rights organizations offering everything from funding to keynote stages. Nina, breathless, stepped into his office. CNN just called. They want you in the studio tomorrow. No. Wait, what? I'm not here for the press. I'm here for court. She paused, then nodded, understanding. That's why he was different. And that's why he was dangerous to people who'd kept their power by pretending justice was too complicated to chase. Inside the courtroom, Wilkins had changed. She didn't challenge him again, didn't mock his tone, didn't raise her voice, but she didn't congratulate him either. She moved through each motion with robotic detachment, like a host at a party who realized too late she was no longer in charge of the guest list. The biggest shift wasn't Wilkins, though. It was the crowd. Now when Elijah entered, people sat straighter, clerks whispered, bailiffs nodded, and for the first time in a long time, Black professionals in that building walked taller because someone had cracked the ceiling and kept walking. On the courthouse steps that afternoon, a dozen protesters stood with signs. Truth isn't aggressive. We stand with Elijah. Body cams weren't off, we were just ignored. He didn't stop to pose. He just raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement as he passed. A small girl on her father's shoulders pointed and asked, "Is he the good guy?" The father, tears shining in his eyes, said, "He's our guy." But not everyone smiled. Inside a downtown law firm, 3 senior partners sat around a long glass table. One of them scrolled through the headlines, jaw tight. Why the hell is he getting all this praise? He embarrassed a sitting judge. He made the department look incompetent. A pause. Should we leak something? No, not yet. Let's see if he slips first. Back at the courthouse, Elijah sat alone in the quiet of his office. Door cracked open. It was Judge Wilkins. She didn't step inside. "I underestimated you," she said, voice low. "That won't happen again." He met her eyes. "I'm not here to be underestimated, Your Honor. I'm here to be reckoned with." She nodded once. "Then I left. No apology. But also no power left to deny. The courtroom didn't change overnight, but the silence did. No more jokes whispered behind backs. No more 'you sure you're in the right room?' when young black interns entered the courthouse. No more mistaking calm for weakness. Elijah had cracked something deeper than a case. He'd cracked the culture. Within days, the DA's office announced a review of over 40 use-of-force cases involving officers. Harris and Cole, 3 other officers, were quietly placed on administrative leave. The police union issued a carefully worded statement about reaffirming commitments to community trust. But the biggest shift? Judge Wilkins was pulled from the docket. Pending review? They called it. Everyone knew why. They just weren't used to seeing consequences actually land. Inside the DOJ, Elijah's name moved up the internal ranks. An email from Washington. Then a call from the Civil Rights Division. Then an invitation to join a newly formed oversight task force. He read it, reread it, then closed the email and left it unanswered. He had unfinished business first. Back at the courthouse, Nina skimmed through a new flyer posted on the lobby wall. Mandatory bias and inclusion training, all court officers and staff. Begins Monday. She looked at Elijah. "They're not happy about this." "They don't have to be happy," he said. "They just have to attend." A local high school civics teacher asked if Elijah would come speak to her class. A civil rights nonprofit offered to name a fellowship after him. The courthouse library added a plaque beneath a photo of him with the quote, "Justice doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs to be seen." Elijah didn't attend the unveiling. He was in court, filing another motion, but for every ripple of progress, a shadow tried to follow. One morning, Elijah arrived to find graffiti on his office door. G.O. Back to D.C. Black marker. All caps. All anger. Nina gasped. Elijah stared at it. Then pulled a pen from his coat pocket, and under it, he wrote, "I am D.C. I brought it here." Meanwhile, city council meetings were packed. People spoke loudly for the first time in years. "We've been ignored. Our cases were dismissed." Officers like Harris don't just act alone, they act protected. A mural of Elijah went up on the side of a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. Painted overnight, gold lettering on black. One phrase, "He walked in alone. He left the door open." Back in his office, Elijah read a letter, handwritten, folded neatly. "No return address. Mr. Grant, you don't know me, but my brother was one of the men those officers hurt. He didn't file charges. He didn't think anyone would believe him. But I watched your trial. You made the system look at itself. Thank you for showing us we weren't crazy. We were just unheard." He folded the letter and slid it into his drawer beside the mugshot of his 17-year-old self. Change doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It shows up in small cracks. In silence being broken. In names being remembered. In offices that can't go back to how they used to function. Because now someone's watching. The headline dropped at 7:42 a.m. Federal prosecutor once arrested as teen. Can he really be trusted? It was all over local news by 8. By 9. The courthouse was buzzing again, but not with pride. With whispers. With doubt. With that old, slick tone of suspicion dressed up as professionalism. Nina stormed into Elijah's office, phone in hand. They leaked your juvenile record. Sealed files, Elijah. This is illegal. It's not illegal if no one's punished, he said calmly, sliding the printed headline aside. She stared at him. Aren't you going to fight it? I already did, he said, 15 years ago. The article was long, bloated with passive language. Sources allege. Some officials question. They suggest a pattern of behavior. It didn't complain. It hinted. It nudged. But the purpose was clear. Make people flinch. Make them hesitate. Make them question if Elijah's rise was built on sand. At 10:15 a.m. Judge Wilkins re-entered the courtroom. Back on the bench. No explanation. Elijah didn't react. Didn't blink. Just rose slowly from his chair and approached the bar. Wilkins adjusted her robe, then leaned forward with a smile just sharp enough to cut. Mr. Grant, would you like to address the court before we proceed with today's arguments? It wasn't protocol. It was bait. Elijah took a breath, then stepped into the center of the courtroom. If anyone's wondering, he began quietly. Yes, I was arrested at 17. No silence. No denial. Just the truth. I was profiled. Thrown in a cell. Told to confess to something I didn't do. He looked around the room, and I stood in a courtroom like this one, wearing handcuffs. Not because I was guilty, but because someone assumed I must be. He turned to the jury box. That moment didn't define my guilt. It defined my purpose. If you believe that someone's past doesn't cancel their right to demand justice, type respect in the comments right now. He held the room in stillness, then walked back to his seat. Not a word from Judge Wilkins. Not a sound from the gallery. Just quiet. Heavy. And on his way past the clerk, she mouthed the word softly. Respect. But outside the courtroom, the real pushback was still unfolding. News trucks circled the block. Commentators threw phrases like dangerous precedent and emotion over professionalism. A retired judge wrote an op-ed titled, "We must respect the robe, not the spotlight." Elijah didn't respond. He filed 2 more motions that day, approved both, but the personal strike cut deeper than he let on. That night, he visited his childhood neighborhood, the one where he'd been handcuffed against a chain-link fence, where a neighbor had snapped a photo that would never make the papers, but lived forever in his memory. He walked past the basketball court where no one asked what college he was going to, just whether he'd make it through the year. And there, sitting on the old bleachers, was someone he hadn't seen in a decade, his brother. I saw the news, his brother said. I figured, Elijah replied. They're scared. Elijah looked at him. Think I should stop? His brother laughed low, warm, proud. You already knew the answer to that. They sat in silence for a while, then his brother added, Besides, if they're digging up dirt, it means they already lost. The next morning, the mural downtown had changed. Someone had added a new line beneath his quote. You tried to bury him, but he was the seed. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Use of excessive force. Tampering with evidence. Conspiracy to obstruct investigation. The jury didn't even look at officers Harris and Cole. As the judge read the decision, they looked at Elijah. Not for celebration, but for Confirmation. That truth had finally outrun. Silence. Judge Wilkins delivered the sentence herself. Her voice was clear, measured, almost reverent, because by now, even she understood. She wasn't just closing a case. She was writing a footnote in someone else's legacy. After court adjourned, the officers were let out in cuffs. No smirks. No bravado. Just the look of men who thought the rules were written in their favor and found out the ink could bleed. Elijah didn't stay for the press. He left through a side exit, briefcase in hand. Outside, the sun hit the marble steps like a spotlight. Reporters rushed forward. Mr. Grant, any words for the community? He paused at the bottom step. Then turned. One, he said quietly. Accountability. Then he walked on. 2 weeks later, the courtroom doors opened to something no one expected. A dedication ceremony. The courthouse had voted unanimously and quietly to rename the Judicial Library. Not after a former judge, not after a politician, but after a prosecutor. The Elijah J. Grant Justice Resource Center. Nina stood beside him as they unveiled the plaque. You know, she whispered, not many people walk into a system that tried to erase them and end up carved into its walls. Elijah smiled softly. I didn't walk in to be remembered, he said. I walked in so no one else would be forgotten. Across the street, a school bus pulled up. A dozen middle school students filed out, part of a field trip on local civics. There, teacher pointed to the plaque, reading aloud. Justice doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to be seen. One of the kids raised her hand. Was he famous? The teacher paused, then nodded. He was fair. Back inside the building, the same clerk who once froze when Elijah entered now kept his photo framed on her desk. Not as a token. As a reminder. Years later, stories would be told about the man who turned courtroom silence into national conversations, who didn't raise his voice but raised the bar, who walked back into the system that cuffed him and rewrote its rules, and the courtroom never sounded the same again, not because it got louder, but because people finally listened.